The wasteland has always carried an air of quiet uncertainty, a sense that beneath the cracked highways and irradiated skies, the world is still whispering about what it used to be and what it might yet become. In Fallout, every old billboard, every rusted sign, every half-buried bunker feels like a faded memory with something left unsaid, a remnant of a civilization that was frantic in its final days and strangely deliberate in the way it disappeared. Some wanderers believe the Great War might never have been as sudden as history claims, that hidden groups knew it was coming long before the sirens ever carved their screams into the sky. Remote relay stations, as far apart as the Mojave and the Commonwealth, broadcast strange pre-war numbers, strings of digits that repeat on certain dates, as if rehearsing signals meant for people who would one day wake up and understand them. It creates the impression that somewhere deep beneath the ruins, old systems still hum with quiet motives, waiting for a world that no longer exists. In the hidden corners of vaults, terminals sometimes contain lines of code that don't match their stated purpose, prototype messages that activate only under conditions that should be impossible. If a lone wanderer happens to stumble into the right room at the right moment, a machine might flash text that hints at an alternate timeline, one where the vault never closed properly, or where its inhabitants followed a different experiment entirely. The idea that vaults can produce visions of lives that never happened has led many to wonder whether Vault-Tec simulations were more than simple psychological tools. Some speculate the company may have been testing versions of reality itself, manipulating probability in the hope of forging the perfect post-war society. When explorers describe déjà vu inside certain vault corridors, hallways, they swear they've walked, even when it's their first time inside. It raises the question of whether Vault-Tec was recording more than behavior, perhaps echoing forgotten test cycles that bleed faintly into the present. The Brotherhood of Steel carries its own secrets, often tucked behind stoic armor and strict tradition. Over time, travelers across the wasteland have noticed that Brotherhood patrol routes frequently follow patterns left behind by military movements predating the bombs. Some roads they choose seem to have no tactical value, yet every scribe documents them meticulously as if honoring a code only half remembered. Wanderers who shadow these patrols long enough sometimes discover old listening posts buried under cliffs or hidden near abandoned farm structures the Brotherhood claims not to know about, though their positions match perfectly with the group's chosen paths. It's possible that the Brotherhood is unconsciously retracing the steps of a forgotten directive, guided by teachings passed down so many times their origin was washed away by dust and duty. Like echoes of soldiers who never returned home, their roots resemble a memory repeating itself endlessly across broken earth. Throughout the wasteland, radios flicker with brief fragments of strange signals that vanish the moment someone tries to record them. Some claim to hear faint voices from before the bombs, as though the world itself replays pieces of its last day. Others report snippets of distress calls that mention towns or individuals who never existed, turning the airwaves into a maze of questions that stretch beyond the boundaries of the known world. Desert wanderers speak of a station that broadcasts only on stormy nights, its music slow and mournful, like a lullaby for cities long gone. When the lightning fades, the broadcast vanishes, leaving static that feels almost warm, almost alive, like someone was listening on the other side. Those who study these signals believe they may be artifacts of long-dead satellite systems circling endlessly above the planet, trapped in a loop of messages that were supposed to save people who never heard them. Even the creatures of Fallout seem shaped by mysteries deeper than radiation alone. For years, wanderers have observed that some species behave unusually near ruins tied to the old world, as if drawn to memories locked inside crumbling walls. There are tales of creatures standing still during quiet moments, seemingly listening to something inaudible, perhaps to echoes of human life that once filled the empty rooms, or to some unseen force shaping instincts that no mutation could explain. Certain ghouls appear to navigate ruins with a familiarity that defies their fragmented minds, avoiding traps and obstacles as though guided by subconscious recollection. It raises the possibility that the irradiated world doesn't just mutate the body, but preserves the faintest embers of identity, letting forgotten impulses drift between life and decay like dust caught in perpetual twilight. Rumors persist of pre-war AI systems still communicating with one another, hidden deep in bunkers, factories, or beneath the foundations of long-collapsed cities. These machines may carry out old routines with no one left to command them, preserving operational loops that once served humanity. In some cases, the programming seems almost too adaptive, as if the AI has learned to evolve in isolation, becoming something more than what its creators intended. Wanderers who stumble upon these systems sometimes describe a feeling of being watched, not with malice, but with curiosity, like a lonely intelligence trying to understand the world it woke up in, wondering why the people who built it never returned. Whether these machines dream of purpose or simply run endless simulations is unknown, but their presence suggests the world beneath Fallout's surface is still very much awake, even if it remains unseen. All across the wasteland, there are terminals hinting at experiments conducted by corporations that vanished the day the bombs fell. Some describe tests designed to preserve consciousness. Others reference chemical complexes that attempted to replicate memories. Scrolled between half-corrupted logs are glimpses of breakthroughs that never reach the public, breakthroughs that might explain why certain individuals report dreams of places they've never been. These dreams often describe vaults untouched by decay, cities preserved in impossible detail, or conversations with loved ones who never lived long enough to see the war. Whether these visions come from fractured trauma, psychic echoes of the old world, or remnants of pre-war scientific meddling remains a mystery. But the people who have them often awaken with the uncanny feeling that the dreams weren't dreams at all, just borrowed memories from a world that never had the chance to be real. Even landscapes in Fallout seem shaped by forces beyond the bombs. In the Mojave, rocks occasionally align into patterns that resemble symbols from pre-war military maps. Across the Commonwealth, storm clouds roll in with unnatural precision, as though steered by weather systems barely functioning after 2 centuries. Travelers crossing the capital wasteland tell stories of winds that suddenly fall silent, leaving the environment eerily still, quiet enough to hear sand shifting far in the distance, quiet enough to feel the barren earth holding its breath. Some believe the storms follow paths determined by old atmospheric machines hidden in government bunkers, still attempting to carry out protocols long abandoned by the world above. Others think the climate has developed a mind of its own, reshaping the wasteland gradually, intentionally, preparing the world for something that hasn't happened yet. Throughout the series, ghost sightings occur often enough to stir unease, usually in forgotten corners where tragedy struck hardest. These specters sometimes wander helplessly, repeating the same actions over and over like echoes trapped in time, unable to break free. In other cases, they appear only briefly before vanishing in a shimmer of light, leaving behind objects that shouldn't exist. Whether these apparitions are glitches in reality caused by heavy radiation, remnants of the mind preserved through trauma, or true spirits caught between worlds is unclear. But they give Fallout a subtle sense of supernatural weight, a world where death doesn't always silence a person completely, where some memories refuse to be buried. And then there's the question of who or what survived the war with its mind intact. Some wanderers whisper that certain factions display uncanny knowledge, reacting to events before they happen, as though guided by predictions the world shouldn't be capable of making. Stories circulate of bunker doors opening moments before travelers arrive, of robots finishing sentences that haven't been spoken yet. Whether these tales are exaggerations, coincidences, or signs of unseen observers remains unknown, but they contribute to the eerie sense that Fallout's world is not truly abandoned. Something still watches, something still learns, something still remembers. The wasteland often feels like a place stitched together from memories that never truly belonged to anyone, and one of its quiet mysteries lies in the way abandoned towns seem to follow invisible patterns. Many players have noticed that certain settlements across different regions look as though they were built by the same hand, possessing identical building angles, repeating fence layouts, and nearly mirrored street formations. Instead of this being a simple asset reuse, some believe it hints at a pre-war government directive, a blueprint for suburban expansion that standardized every small American town. It creates the eerie sensation that every ruined neighborhood is part of one forgotten network, an entire nation designed to be modular in case it needed to be rebuilt quickly after a disaster the public never knew was coming. The more you wander these ghostly communities, the more it feels like you're walking through echoes of a grand plan that died before anyone had a chance to understand it. Wandering the wilderness long enough leads to strange patterns in the placement of radio towers, some of which line up almost too perfectly with military checkpoints, satellite arrays, and research facilities. Each tower looks like nothing more than a forgotten frame of rusted metal, but when lined together on a map, they resemble a communication grid so deliberate that it suggests someone expected the world to collapse and wanted a way to maintain a signal afterward. Some believe this was a classified emergency network designed to activate automatically, explaining why certain radio stations across the wasteland continue broadcasting decades after their operators are long gone. It creates the lingering feeling that something out there is still listening, still waiting for a message meant to be sent in a time that never came. Deep within old vault corridors, the fluorescent lights flicker in a rhythm that doesn't match any other electrical pattern in the game. Some believe these flickers aren't random, but rather encoded reminders left for overseers, rhythmic pulses based on pre-war, morale-boosting messages. Others think the lights behave that way because the vaults were designed with hidden diagnostic patterns that still run eternally despite every human who once understood them being long dead. The flickers start to feel almost alive, like the vault itself is trying to speak in a mechanical language that its creators never intended for ordinary people to hear. The Brotherhood of Steel's obsession with collecting old-world technology often feels too specific, as though they're following instructions they don't fully understand. Their fixation on energy weapons, power supplies, and long-range communications suggests a fear not of raiders or mutants, but of something more abstract. Some believe the Brotherhood's founders found records indicating that pre-war scientists were trying to contact something beyond Earth, and that remnants of those efforts are buried deeply in old research documents the Brotherhood guards obsessively. Their actions begin to feel less like preservation and more like containment, as though they know that certain inventions shouldn't reappear, no matter how useful they might be. The glowing sea, with its dense radioactive fog and surreal twisted structures, often feels like a place caught between two moments in time. The strange formations and the ghostly ambience have led some to wonder whether the region was hit not by a single bomb, but by multiple detonations in overlapping shockwaves that tore apart the boundary between physical space and lingering energy fields. The unnatural green glow seems almost too alive, pulsing with a rhythm that feels wrong, as if the land remembers the exact second of its destruction and replays it infinitely in waves of light. It creates the impression that the glowing sea is not just irradiated, it's still burning with the memory of the world's end. Certain terminals scattered across laboratories and abandoned bunkers contain fragmented messages that reference unnamed special subjects, data streams that don't match any known biological research. These broken entries almost seem intentionally corrupted, as though someone tried to destroy evidence but didn't finish the job. The locations of these terminals form a rough shape when plotted on maps, almost like constellations pointing toward deeper secrets. Some wanderers believe the remnants represent a collaboration that spanned multiple scientific divisions before the war, an underground project that might still have traces hidden far beneath the cracked earth. The implication is subtle, but powerful. Not everything the wasteland hides was lost. Some things were buried on purpose. Companions across different regions often share small quirks in their backstories that hint at a larger pattern. Many recall nightmares or fragments of dreams involving machines, cold rooms, or hazy memories that never belonged to their own lives. These similarities suggest a possibility that pre-war psychological conditioning experiments were far more widespread than previously believed, affecting not just soldiers, but civilians unaware of their involvement. The wasteland survivors, without knowing it, may be connected through common threads of forgotten trauma that still shape their instincts generations later. The world feels haunted not by ghosts of the dead, but by memories implanted in the living. When you stand on ruined overpasses at night and look across the barren land, certain distant lights blink at identical intervals, even in completely unrelated locations. These blinking patterns match the timing of old aviation warning systems, but there's something uncanny about the synchronization over such long distances. Some believe these lights represent a remnant of a pre-war early warning network still responding to signals deep within the earth. Others think the lights are quietly communicating with one another, forming a forgotten system that continues cycling because no one ever told it the world had ended. It creates the sense that the ruins themselves still follow orders issued by people long gone. Old military bunkers contain maps marked with thick red lines that seem to form protective circles around key industrial facilities. These circles have unusual radii, suggesting the military anticipated dangers far greater than simple foreign attacks. Some believe they represent predicted blast zones, evacuation corridors, or even boundaries for experimental weapons the public never knew existed. The way these circles overlap in strange, swirling patterns almost looks like the military was preparing for something that could spread or move unpredictably, as though the dangers they foresaw weren't entirely physical. If these markings were based on classified simulations, then the pre-war world wasn't merely afraid. It was planning for a future it already believed was inevitable. The more you explore the wasteland, the more you notice that certain creatures behave strangely under specific weather conditions. Deathclaws sometimes freeze in place and stare into the distance during sandstorms, ignoring the player entirely. Yao Guai tilt their heads toward the ground before thunder, as though they sense vibrations from deep underground. These behaviors suggest that mutated animals retain fragments of instincts tied to events no human remembers. Perhaps seismic patterns caused by underground labs or echoes of abandoned machinery, still moving faintly beneath the soil. The land feels like a living organism, and its creatures behave like nerves reacting to distant pressure. Nuka World contains hints of something stranger than its cheerful pre-war presentation suggests. Beneath layers of advertisements and carnival rides lie old maintenance tunnels filled with wiring diagrams that reference devices not found anywhere else in the franchise. Some believe they were designed to power an early version of Vault-Tec's simulation chambers, connecting the theme park to the company's experiments in psychological conditioning. The park's bright colors and artificial joy begin to feel like a mask, hiding something that was never meant to be seen. The contrast between laughter and secrecy makes Nuka World one of the most unsettling locations in the wasteland. Certain terminals mention projects intended to outlast the end of the world, such as automated weather monitors, long-range communication relays, and satellite links engineered to operate for centuries without maintenance. The fact that some of these systems still function suggests that somewhere, far above the radiation, machines continue orbiting the Earth, quietly working as if humanity never fell. They shift, they calculate, they record, following instructions from a civilization that no longer exists. The idea that ancient devices still observe the wasteland gives the world a feeling of perpetual surveillance, as though human creation refuses to let the planet forget its past. And scattered throughout the Commonwealth are old train tunnels that seem far too deep and too engineered for simple transportation. Their angles descend into darkness with a precision unbecoming of civilian infrastructure, suggesting they once connected to underground facilities that have since collapsed or been sealed. Wanderers who listen closely claim they can hear distant clanks of metal and low mechanical hums through the walls, like echoes from machinery that should no longer be active. The wasteland doesn't just hide old labs, it mutters their secrets through stone. Some theorists believe the wasteland itself remembers the nuclear fire that shaped it, holding the echo of that moment in the air, like a scent you can never fully identify. They say the constant hum beneath Fallout's ambient sound isn't just wind or static, but a residual frequency created when millions of lives vanished at once. The theory suggests that the world retains emotional memory, that the land itself carries trauma the way ruins carry dust. Wanderers sometimes claim that when you stand perfectly still near abandoned suburbs, the sound changes faintly, almost like a sigh carried through broken windows. Whether that sigh comes from ghosts, the environment, or the listener's imagination doesn't matter, the result is the same. Fallout's world feels alive, almost conscious, as if it were watching over the remnants of a civilization it once held. Another theory proposes that pre-war America attempted to weaponize weather, and the strange storms that roam the Commonwealth are the fragmented results of an unfinished experiment. According to environmental monitoring terminals, certain areas exhibit temperature changes far too rapid to be natural, and lightning patterns often follow strangely geometric paths. Some believe the Enclave tried to harness atmospheric energy as a defense system, turning the sky into a battlefield. If true, it would mean the wasteland storms aren't just weather, they're artifacts of a war that never truly ended, weapons that continue firing long after their creators disappeared. Others argue the storms behave almost like living things, shifting direction when watched, as if the sky itself tries to avoid being understood. There's a theory about ghouls that paints them not as victims of radiation, but as the intended outcome of a biological immortality project. The idea suggests that the pre-war government researched ways to preserve human consciousness through mutation rather than medicine. Many ghouls, after all, retain memories that stretch across centuries, their minds refusing to fade even when their bodies decay. The theory wonders whether ghoulification was meant to be a form of eternal service, an unending human labor force that wouldn't need food, rest, or medical care. If the bombs hadn't fallen, perhaps ghouls would have been the workers of America's far future, their suffering reinterpreted not as tragedy but as design. And the feral ones, lost to instinct, would be simple byproducts of a procedure pushed too far. Some players believe Deathclaw's evolved intelligence much faster than originally intended, and that somewhere in the wasteland exists a pack that communicates using gestures and low-frequency calls. This theory stems from animations that show Deathclaws hesitating before attacking, circling enemies, or retreating unexpectedly. While these behaviors can be explained through AI mechanics, the theory suggests these creatures might be developing culture. In rare encounters, two Deathclaws appear to coordinate ambushes, one drawing attention while the other waits in shadows. This has led to speculation that Deathclaws are only 1 or 2 generations away from speech, from forming communities, from becoming yet another intelligent species left wandering the ruins of the old world. Another long-standing theory claims that Vault-Tec never intended most vaults to fail. The chaos simply revealed results even the company hadn't planned for. According to this theory, Vault-Tec treated each vault as part of a vast simulation meant to prepare humanity for colonizing other planets. Isolation, environmental manipulation, social stressors, forced scarcity, all conditions astronauts would face on long-term missions. Vault casualties were never the goal, they were data points. If humanity had survived intact, Vault-Tec might have launched the next generation of society into space, using Vault dwellers as the blueprint for a species capable of thriving anywhere. The apocalypse merely turned the simulation into reality too early. Some theorists claim that the mysterious numbers stamped on Nuka-Cola bottles reference a hidden sequence tied to quantum mechanics. The numbers appear randomly, but several players insist they correspond to isotopes used in theoretical nuclear fuel. According to this theory, Nuka World wasn't just an amusement park, it was a front for advanced energy research. Nuka Quantum's glow, after all, resembles Cherenkov radiation, and its flavor changes as if influenced by shifting chemical bonds. If Nuka-Cola was experimenting with stable nuclear liquids, the drink itself may have been a precursor to a civilian energy source, disguised as a neon blue novelty beverage. The bombs interrupted that research, but traces of its potential still sparkle in every bottle. In the Mojave, the radio towers scattered across the desert share structural similarities not found in any other region. Some theorists believe they were part of a national early warning echo network designed to transmit shockwave data between states. According to this theory, the towers weren't meant to broadcast voices, they were meant to listen to the sky. When nuclear detonations occur, they create unique resonance signatures in the ionosphere. The towers were built to read those signatures, predicting bomb trajectories or secondary strikes. If so, the towers may still be scanning, waiting for a signal that will never come, standing as silent sentinels beneath a sun that never cools. There's a haunting theory about synths that imagines consciousness as a transferable pattern rather than a biological process. Some believe that when a synth dreams, yes, dreams, they tap into the lingering psychic residue of humanity itself. According to this idea, synth dreams aren't their own memories, but echoes of real human lives lost in the bombs. Their nightmares about fire, their visions of crowds, their feelings of déjà vu when walking into intact homes. These might be borrowed memories, fragments of minds etched into the very radiation that coats the world. If true, synth identity becomes something more than imitation. They'd be mosaics of ancient souls, reconstructed from the air around them. A lesser-known theory suggests that the glowing sea isn't simply a radioactive wasteland, but a type of biome still evolving. The storms there pulse with colors scientists can't fully explain, and the ground sometimes emits faint heat even when the air cools. Some wanderers believe the radiation has awakened a primitive ecosystem that doesn't rely on sunlight or water, but instead feeds on the energy left behind by nuclear devastation. Beneath the cracked earth, Something grows, something that perceives radiation the way creatures perceive warmth. In this way, the glowing sea becomes a cradle of new life, not death, a terrible but natural rebirth, waiting for the world to become quiet enough for it to rise. Another theory claims that Liberty Prime was never designed as a robot of war, but as a propaganda device. His famous catchphrases resemble slogans intended to inspire loyalty, not battlefield precision. Some historians speculate that Liberty Prime was intended to stand unmoving in Washington, D.C., shouting patriotic messages through the ruins to keep morale alive after the bombs fell. The so-called weapon of freedom may have been, at its core, a monument meant to talk forever, even if no one remained to hear. The fact that he still walks is a glitch in history, a statue accidentally brought to life. Some believe the Brotherhood of Steel was never meant to survive long after the Great War, and that its longevity is a narrative anomaly within a world obsessed with entropy. This theory proposes that the Brotherhood's survival stems from a deeper function coded into their identity preservation, not only of technology, but of structure. The wasteland tears down everything: buildings, governments, families. But the Brotherhood endures because it carries a structural blueprint strong enough to outlast chaos. According to this theory, the Brotherhood acts as a stabilizing force in the world's psychological landscape, a mythic reminder that humanity can still organize itself around something greater than survival. There's a theory about the Nightkin that suggests their stealth boy addiction didn't warp their minds, it awakened new senses. Some players claim Nightkin react to emotions in rooms even when silent, as if they sense tension or intent in the air. According to the theory, prolonged exposure to invisibility technology heightened their awareness beyond traditional sight and sound. This would mean the Nightkin aren't broken, they're seeing a world normal humans can't, a place full of vibrational patterns and emotional signatures left behind by trauma. Their aggression might be a reaction not to hallucination, but to overstimulation. They're navigating a world too loud for minds tuned to deeper frequencies. And then there's the unsettling idea that the wasteland's animals know more than they let on. Brahmin often stare in seemingly random directions, but several players have documented them watching distant storms with uncanny accuracy, as if predicting their approach long before the sky darkens. Mirrorlurks sometimes retreat from areas that later erupt in radstorms. Dogs whine at buildings that contain intact holotapes, almost guiding players toward forgotten histories. The theory suggests that animals have adapted senses attuned to radioactive shifts, psychic echoes, or environmental memory. In a world built from the ashes of knowledge, perhaps the beasts inherited what humanity lost. Another theory claims the red rocket stations form a pattern when mapped a shape resembling a giant circuit. The placement seems arbitrary until you realize they align along ley lines of pre-war electrical grids. Some believe Red Rocket was preparing to create a nationwide energy field, turning every gas station into a node of wireless power distribution. After the war, the stations no longer function, but the pattern remains, a ghost network waiting to activate if anyone ever rebuilds the world correctly. There's also a theory that the pre-war world didn't simply fall into decadence, it broke under the weight of too much time. According to this view, the Great War wasn't an accident, but an inevitability of a world that had stopped evolving. Humanity created technology faster than meaning. Societies grew without direction. The bombs became a symbolic reset, an explosion not only of atoms, but of stagnation. If true, the wasteland isn't a tragedy. It's the painful beginning of a world being forced to remember how to reinvent itself. Across the wasteland, there are countless abandoned bunkers whose original owners have vanished without a trace. Yet some players believe these bunkers weren't simply deserted. One theory suggests that certain locations, especially those found in mountain ranges or off-grid valleys were designed as experimental memory chambers, secure rooms meant to preserve not just supplies but personalities. According to this idea, the terminals inside these bunkers were configured to record neural patterns from those who lived there, quietly saving coded fragments of their minds in hopes of rebuilding identity after societal collapse. The static-filled audio logs found in some ruins, with their strange skips, echoes, and half-sentences, are thought by some theorists to be scrambled mind prints bleeding through corrupted data. The idea paints a haunting picture of ordinary people trying to secure something deeper than survival, an attempt to save their own consciousness in a world that no longer promised bodies to return to. Others look to the strange phenomenon of children surviving generations without ever appearing to grow into adults. Whether in vaults, settlements, or wandering the wastes, children in Fallout seem frozen in age, immune to the passage of time that crushes everything else. This has led to a theory that children could be living remnants of pre-war cloning experiments. Some believe Vault-Tec, obsessed with maintaining control of human development, manufactured static children as baseline genetic templates that would remain unchanging for decades. These templates may have been intended to serve as perfect recruits, diplomats, or test subjects, individuals who could retain youth indefinitely. Their ageless nature may be less a video game design constraint and more a subtle echo of an unseen narrative, a world where childhood was engineered as a permanent state, unaging, unchanged, and forever innocent in a wasteland that offers nothing but ruin. Late-night explorers in Fallout's open world often speak of hearing faint whispers deep in radiation, Storm's voices nearly lost beneath the howling wind and crackling static of Geiger counters. One theory proposes that radioactive storms serve as atmospheric amplifiers for old radio signals still drifting across long-dead airwaves. These storms, mixing electromagnetic interference with ionized particles, could revive fragments of centuries-old broadcasts, temporarily reanimating voices from before the bombs fell. According to this theory, the whispers aren't supernatural but technological ghost signals delayed so long that they seem to escape time itself. Some claim to have recognized old jingles, distress calls, and even fragments of wartime news bulletins buried in the static. Whether hearing echoes of history or simply imagination amplified by loneliness, players find these storms feel like the world trying to remember what it once was. An equally eerie theory surrounds the behavior of robots in the wasteland. Some sentry bots and Mr. Gutsis appear to operate far from logical patrol paths, wandering aimlessly across miles of terrain with no registered destination. This has inspired speculation that their memory cores contain residual patterns from their pre-programmed military routines, echoes of orders given before the Great War that continue to drive them even without commanders. According to this theory, their wandering represents a kind of digital grief, robotic minds looping through incomplete missions in an attempt to resolve directives that will never be fulfilled. The soft hum of their servos becomes something mournful when seen this way, a machine searching endlessly for wars that ended centuries ago. Another theory stretches even further, suggesting that the same lingering military code that keeps robots active may also influence certain settlements. Some small communities seem too advanced for their isolated conditions, building organized defenses, schedules, and supply routes without any clear source of coordination. This has sparked speculation that automated military protocols embedded in pre-war infrastructure occasionally activate in hidden ways. These hidden systems might track movement, allocate resources, and even guide settlement development, reviving ancient defense algorithms long after their creators died. According to this idea, the settlement's success isn't pure luck. It's the invisible hand of a forgotten defense network, quietly directing its survival through old code that still refuses to die. Then there are the strange coincidences involving mutated animals that exhibit synchronized behaviors across vast distances. Radstags turning their heads in unison, mola rats emerging from tunnels at rhythmically consistent intervals, or entire groups of radroaches clustering in perfect circles have led some theorists to believe that mutation in Fallout doesn't just create new physical forms, it may also have triggered collective instincts. A theory known as the hive memory hypothesis suggests that radiation awakened dormant ancestral behaviors, linking animals across the wasteland through instinctual pulses. These pulses, so faint they barely register to humans, could be guiding mutated wildlife like an invisible song written into the biology of every irradiated creature. It paints the wasteland not as random chaos, but as an ecosystem guided by a quiet, unseen choreography. Vault-Tech's role in the apocalypse also continues to fuel countless theories. One of the more unsettling ones proposes that certain vaults weren't meant to house people at all, but were instead designed to test large-scale psychological effects of despair. According to this theory, the isolation, scarcity, and repeated traumas within vaults were monitored not for scientific curiosity, but for the purpose of crafting a post-war population that would accept authoritarian rule without resistance. The vaults, in this interpretation, weren't shelters, they were crucibles, shaping human fear into compliance. The theory suggests that the control vaults were less about preserving humanity and more about ensuring that those who survived would never question who held power in the new world. A separate but equally chilling idea claims that the bombs themselves may have been intended not by politicians, but by entities hidden beneath the surface of history. Those who subscribe to this theory point to patterns in pre-war research into dimensional energy, teleportation, and exotic weapons technologies referenced repeatedly, but never fully explained. Some theorists believe the scientists working on these breakthroughs accidentally discovered something beyond human comprehension, and that the Great War wasn't a conflict between nations, but an attempt to contain whatever they uncovered. The bombs, they argue, were a desperate sacrifice, an attempt to burn away a threat too enormous to face directly. In this view, the wasteland is not just a scar of war, but a bandage over something deeper and far more terrifying. Another theory focuses on the lingering presence of ghouls. While most assume their transformation is simply the result of prolonged radiation exposure, some players propose that certain ghouls survive not because of mutation, but because of something embedded intentionally in pre-war medical treatments. Many civilians received immunizations against bioweapons, and some theorists posit that these vaccines contained dormant nanotech systems designed to repair damaged tissue at the cellular level. When exposed to radiation, these systems may activate in unexpected ways, leading to the grotesque yet functional state of ghoul physiology. In this sense, ghouls are not victims. They're the accidental beneficiaries of forgotten technology meant to preserve life at any cost, no matter how distorted that life becomes. The uncanny resemblance between different wasteland ruins has also inspired speculation that cities were constructed on top of older, pre-nuclear templates designed by the government. This layered America theory suggests that pre-war architects built modern towns atop ancient blueprints left behind from early secret projects. According to this idea, the identical layouts of certain neighborhoods, with their repeating street angles and mirrored building patterns, aren't accidents. They're remnants of template cities designed for efficient reconstruction after catastrophic events. The wasteland's predictable geometry becomes, in this interpretation, a quiet testament to a past in which destruction was expected enough to plan for. Some theorists turn their attention to the mysterious radio signals heard throughout Fallout games. These strange broadcasts often play music interrupted by codes or seemingly meaningless numbers. But one interpretation suggests they may be time-displaced signals, echoes from alternative timelines, or collapsed realities that bleed into the wasteland's airwaves. Radiation storms, quantum anomalies, and old relay systems might act as conduits for transmissions slipping through fractures in time. When players hear encoded messages or distorted numbers, they could be encountering fragments of worlds that no longer exist, static-filled shouts from fading universes brushing briefly against the one that survived. Even the presence of legendary creatures in the wasteland inspires theories. Some believe that certain mutated beasts, such as the enormous albino radscorpions or glowing deathclaws, are not mere evolutionary accidents. Instead, they are echoes of mythological archetypes embedded in human imagination long before the bombs fell. According to this theory, the wasteland's chaos creates conditions where symbolic fears take physical form, shaped unconsciously by the collective mind of humanity. The creatures become manifestations of stories older than civilization, born again in radioactive soil, their forms sculpted by primal memories rather than biology. Finally, there is a theory that ties every Fallout game together: the idea that the wasteland itself might be alive, not in the way a creature is alive, but in the way a dream breathes. According to this belief, the world of Fallout remembers every footstep, every echo, every action. Radiation, storms, whispered radio signals, synchronized animal behavior, robotic wanderings, and lingering human ghosts are not random occurrences. They're symptoms of a landscape that thinks in slow, geological time. The wasteland becomes a single, vast memory shaped by centuries of war, loss, and survival, watching over those who walk across its broken surface and whispering its stories back through wind, static, and silence. Across the wasteland, strange whispers linger in forgotten corners, and every ruined settlement seems to carry a theory waiting quietly beneath the dust. Some wanderers believe the wasteland storms aren't entirely natural, insisting that the odd colors swirling through the sky are remnants of pre-war climate experiments. They imagine that old satellites still orbit far above, broken but not dead, releasing pulses of data that shape the horizon. Whether true or not, the idea makes it easier to understand why the clouds in Fallout games often move with purpose, churning like memories trying to rest. In places like the glowing sea or the dustlands of Nevada, the storms almost seem alive, responding to footsteps and gunfire, pulsing as though the sky itself flinches when violence rises below. There are wanderers who believe that ghouls can sometimes sense remnants of their former lives, not through memory, but through instinct woven deep into mutated senses. They say a feral ghoul pauses near the home it once lived in, or hesitates when hearing an old pre-war song, reacting to echoes buried deep beneath radiation and decay. It's a heartbreaking theory, imagining that inside their fractured minds, there's still a flicker of identity, just enough humanity to ache, but not enough to speak. Some suggest this explains why ghouls scream differently in certain regions, as if each wasteland shapes its broken citizens in its own image. Others think their varied cries are a kind of language, a distorted mirror of emotions they can no longer express. In the ruins scattered outside DC, players sometimes spot radios that flicker on for a second, playing a static burst before powering down again. One theory says these brief transmissions aren't random at all, but remnants of old Enclave frequency testing, still echoing through a dilapidated network of antennas the Brotherhood never fully dismantled. According to speculation, certain radios attempt to reconnect at rare moments, trying to rejoin a long-dead communication grid out of reflex. These signals might be broken, but they mimic the structure of official broadcasts, suggesting ancient machines are still trying their best to follow orders. A stranger idea proposes that the wasteland itself has a rhythm, not in a mystical sense, but in the structure of how creatures spawn and roam. Observant travelers notice that wildlife sometimes appears in waves, almost choreographed. One group of Mallarats bursts from the ground, then no creatures appear for minutes, only for a pack of dogs to emerge shortly after. The theory imagines the ecosystem functioning like a hidden heartbeat patterns of emergence, rest, and retreat that keep the world from feeling truly empty. Some say the cycles are influenced by unseen radiation tides, invisible shifts that cause life to ebb and flow in ways no one fully understands. Another theory claims the Brotherhood of Steel's distrust of outsiders might stem from information the rest of the wasteland never sees. People speculate that the Brotherhood's archives contain classified pre-war reports about failed attempts to integrate civilians into military bunkers during the Great War. These accounts supposedly detail betrayals, resource shortages, and near mutinies lessons so painful that the Brotherhood's isolation wasn't ideology, but trauma passed down through generations. Under this theory, their steel fortresses aren't symbols of pride, but monuments to fear, shielding them not only from the outside world, but from repeating history. In New Vegas, people debate the origins of the ghosts said to haunt the Mojave at night. Some players swear that in the quiet between wind gusts, they hear faint footsteps or muffled voices drifting through open desert. A theory suggests these aren't spirits at all, but remnants of a pre-war satellite mesh net, still sampling environmental sound and replaying audio fragments at random. Considering the Mojave once hosted military test grounds, this explanation feels almost plausible. And yet, something about those distant echoes, often occurring at dawn or dusk, feels too emotional to be purely mechanical, like whispers of those who walked the sands before the world broke. In the Commonwealth, theorists are fascinated by the idea that certain synths might possess dormant personalities far richer than anyone realizes. Because their memories are stored as highly compressed data, some believe old imprints may lie buried under new programming. When a Gen 3 synth hesitates before speaking or pauses at a familiar street corner, people speculate that a phantom memory has surfaced. Maybe a pre-institute identity brushing gently against the present, trying to remind the metal and flesh hybrid of something it once loved. The spark of humanity in a synth's eyes, whether real or imagined, is a thread players tug at endlessly, wondering if consciousness can truly be overwritten. Another lingering idea suggests the NCR's bureaucracy is built upon pre-war government models discovered in long-abandoned archives. According to this theory, their laws and structures aren't merely attempts at civilization, but deliberate recreations of an old world they barely understand. Copies of copies, paperwork mimicking paperwork, handing down traditions whose original purpose has long been lost. This would explain why the NCR feels both organized and dysfunctional, like a civilization performing a ritual without knowing its meaning. There's a popular belief among fans that rad scorpions don't just burrow to hunt, but also to listen. Their bodies are incredibly sensitive to vibration, and some theorists propose they sense distant movement miles away using tremor patterns. The wasteland around them is like a vast drum, with each footstep sending ripples through the sand. This theory paints rad scorpions as silent guardians of the desert, creatures that interact with a world of underground echoes humans cannot perceive. Their sudden appearances might seem surprising to wanderers, but to them, emerging at the perfect moment, is simply responding to the loudest tremble in the earth. A quiet theory speculates on why vault designs vary so dramatically. Beyond experiments and social engineering, some think the Vault Tech Corporation tailored each vault's layout to match theories of psychological resilience. Hallway lengths, room sizes, even ceiling height were likely deliberate choices meant to manipulate mental states over decades of isolation. Vault residents may have felt emotions shaped not by their environment, but by architectural intent, a controlled simulation of comfort, confinement, and subtle pressure. Even the location of hydroponic rooms or communal areas may reflect experiments in shaping where people naturally gather when hope fades. In countless Fallout games, travelers stumble upon lone terminals emitting occasional sparks of life. Some of these terminals show fragmented logs or corrupted user profiles with no clear meaning. A theory suggests these machines represent lost consciousness data ghosts, fragments of pre-war personalities still clinging to reality. If minds can be digitized, even imperfectly, then perhaps these broken terminals are tombstones of sorts, preserving faint traces of people long gone. A corrupted phrase repeated endlessly or a half-saved entry could be the digital equivalent of a ghost calling into the dark. Another interesting idea proposes that Securitrons and Protectrons grow more personable the longer they operate. Over time, minor data drift and speech pattern decay create quirks that resemble personality traits. What begins as mechanical malfunction slowly becomes character robots, greeting travelers more warmly or responding with unexpected sarcasm, not due to coding, but because years of environmental damage created patterns that feel almost organic. Under this theory, the Wasteland's machines aren't just relics, they're evolving into something like synthetic wildlife. There's a theory that the glowing eyes of certain mutated creatures aren't just cosmetic, but serve as rudimentary communication. Their eyes might contain reflective proteins similar to deep-sea animals, allowing them to signal in low light. If true, then every glowing creature is part of an unseen language, blinking in patterns too alien for humans to understand. The wasteland may be filled with silent conversations between species bound by mutation rather than speech. Some wanderers swear that the wasteland becomes quieter after major story events, not just emotionally, but literally. Ambient audio changes, wildlife spawns shift, and even wind patterns seem softer. A theory proposes that the world subtly reacts to the player's progress, adjusting its tone to mirror the weight of decisions made. When the player kills, the desert winds howl longer. When peace is restored, the breeze relaxes. The environment becomes a mute witness to the journey, grieving or celebrating through sound. And finally, a haunting theory lingers across Fallout communities: the idea that the world's silence, its soft winds, its empty roads, and the quiet hum of old machines are more than atmospheric design. Perhaps the wasteland remembers. Perhaps its stillness is the consciousness of the world recovering, slowly trying to piece itself back together after unimaginable ruin. The broken highways, the flickering lights, the skeletons resting in forgotten corners. Everything seems to hold a quiet longing for connection, as though the world itself hopes someone will stay long enough to listen. There are corners of the Fallout universe where theories drift like dust in forgotten sunlight, settling into cracks and ruins until they become indistinguishable from truth. One of the most enduring theories suggests that the wasteland itself is alive in a way that defies normal understanding. Some believe the Commonwealth's weather patterns aren't just random storms, but the breath of a wounded world that still remembers its shape. Radiation storms feel too intentional, too rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat pulsing through sickened skies. This idea has led some to wonder if the planet has been trying to heal, and each storm is its way of pushing out toxins the same way a living body might. Across the Mojave, people whisper theories about the ghosts in Repcon headquarters. The strange voices caught in the static of old radios, the unexplained footsteps echoing down empty hallways, all create the illusion that the building itself hasn't accepted its emptiness. Those who study the place argue that the recordings triggered by your presence might not be pre-war messages at all, but energy signatures trapped in concrete, replaying themselves in loops the way broken memories sometimes do. Radiation doesn't just corrupt flesh, it corrupts sound, preserving the past in flickers of electronic life. There's another theory that haunts travelers of the Capital Wasteland, the belief that certain protectrons seem to recognize you in ways they shouldn't. Their lines occasionally repeat in incorrect contexts, as if part of a personality lurks behind the programming. Some Wastelanders even swear they saw a protectron hesitate before attacking, as though it remembered something. The theory suggests that not all robots were wiped clean by EMP blasts. Some retain fragments of consciousness that drift between logic cores, like lost spirits searching for hosts. In the Commonwealth, there's a quiet rumor involving the Diamond City maintenance tunnels. Workers speak of a strange hum that only appears during low-power hours, a soft resonance that feels almost like a lullaby sung through pipes. Some believe it's an echo of the city's power grid, but others think it's something deeper, perhaps the remains of an old emergency signal stuck in a half-powered loop. A few insist the hum contains a repeating pattern resembling Morse code, the message fading in and out like someone desperately trying to speak across decades of ruin. The glowing sea, with its surreal storms and eerie silence, has always inspired theories. One suggests that the region wasn't simply destroyed by a bomb, but altered by it, transformed into a space where time moves differently. Explorers claim that certain shadows shift slower there, as though lagging a fraction behind the world. Combined with the warped magnetic fields and the unpredictable behavior of Pip-Boy sensors, it creates the sense that the glowing sea exists slightly out of sync with everything else. Radiation becomes not just poison, but distortion, warping reality the way heat bends light. Travelers in New Vegas whisper about a strange phenomenon near Black Mountain, where sounds seem to carry farther at night. Some theorize the mountain's radio transmitter, long corrupted and half broken, affects the atmosphere, turning it into a giant amplifier. Others think Nightkin rituals, performed in secret caves, caused spiritual shifts in the land, thinning the barrier between spoken words and echoes. Either way, the idea that Black Mountain listens and repeats what it hears is something wanderers try not to dwell on for too long. Far to the west, people exploring the old ruins north of Shady Sands tell stories about the buried vaults beneath the desert. They say some of the ventilation systems still breathe, pulling in air that flows through empty halls. The air is too steady, too rhythmic, almost as if something inside those underground spaces still lives. What remains of Vault-Tec's experiments may linger in unseen machinery, quietly maintaining whatever purpose it was built for. The theory suggests that not all vault systems were meant to preserve humans. Some were designed to preserve ideas, memories, or perhaps even the vaults themselves. In Nuka World, some theorists claim the mascots aren't entirely mechanical. When observed closely, their eyes reflect light differently, producing a faint purple shimmer that doesn't match their wiring. Some believe a fragment of quantum contamination settled into their cameras, making them sensitive to energy signatures from other dimensions. It's a stretch, but in a universe where time-traveling wrist devices and teleportation research exist, the idea that contamination could alter a machine's perception isn't impossible. The mascots might be seeing something you can't, The idea that synths dream has fascinated scholars and scavengers alike. In certain rare dialogues, synths pause in ways that don't match normal CPU cycles. During these pauses, their eyes dim for a single frame, suggesting they enter micro-idle states similar to REM sleep. The theory posits that memories don't just store themselves, they rearrange and rewrite. This means synths experience something like dreams, where stored sensory data blends with new input. And if synths can dream, then they can imagine. And if they can imagine, they may fear or hope in ways indistinguishable from humanity. A theory that circulates around Rivet City proposes that the aircraft carrier holds a deeper basement level never meant for civilian access. Divers claim they heard metallic knocking from beneath the ship during storms, a steady tapping that seemed rhythmic. Combined with the leftover pre-war blueprints suggesting subcompartments sealed with blast doors, some believe a forgotten experiment remains locked beneath the carrier. Whether it's a weapon, a cryogenic crew, or something even stranger, the truth remains submerged in water too irradiated for exploration. Another whispered idea among survivors is that radstags didn't just mutate biologically, they adapted consciously. Their split antlers and two-headed forms may not be the result of blind mutation, but a selective advantage shaped by the wasteland itself. Some believe radstags developed dual sensory systems to detect danger from broader angles. The intelligence isn't obvious, but the way they move in coordinated patterns suggests something beyond mere instinct, almost like a primitive herd intelligence heightened by radiation. In the Mojave, certain gamblers insist the Lucky 38 isn't just a casino, but a superweapon in disguise. The patterns on its exterior align with military satellite records from the pre-war era. The alignment is no coincidence. Each line forms a grid that could theoretically track orbital paths. The theory posits that Mr. House wasn't preserving a casino, he was guarding a targeting system capable of adjusting orbital trajectories. The building itself might have been built not for guests, but for guidance data, a lighthouse for weapons that never fired. The Capital Wasteland has its own strange rumor involving the super mutants. Some scavengers believe that certain mutants display unexpected flashes of memory, especially around locations that mattered in their human lives. A mutant may hesitate near Megaton's ruins or grow agitated in old metro tunnels. The theory suggests a sliver of who they were flickers through occasionally, trapped beneath layers of forced evolution. These moments aren't frequent, but they're enough to unsettle even hardened wanderers. Radiation may twist flesh, but memory sometimes refuses to die. In the Institute, the hum of machinery hides peculiar irregularities. Some believe the power grid produces tones that vary based on who walks the halls. It's as though the building itself reacts to emotional presence. The idea is that the Institute uses biosensors to modify the environment constantly, adjusting lighting, temperature, and even ambient sound in subtle ways that influence behavior. If true, the place doesn't just house scientists, it shapes them, guiding their mood silently, molding them like clay without their knowledge. Venturing near old Enclave outposts reveals something strange in the air. Scanners pick up residual electronic signatures long after the outposts are abandoned. These signatures form strange repeating loops, almost like encrypted messages caught in infinite repetition. Some wasteland cryptographers believe these are fragments of Enclave communications corrupted by electromagnetic pulses, forever replaying the last seconds before each facility fell. In that sense, the outposts aren't just ruins, they're echoes, stuck whispering their own demise for anyone who happens to listen. The children of Adam inspire countless theories, the strangest of which suggests their faith has a real, tangible power. Some believe that radiation responds to their presence in subtle ways, lingering longer or glowing brighter during rituals. Observers swear that the air thickens during their prayers, almost vibrating with static. Whether Adam is real or simply the manifestation of their collective belief, something stirs when they worship, as if the wasteland itself listens. And then there's the idea that somewhere in the wasteland, something watches. Creatures tilt their heads toward empty sky, terminals flicker without reason, and certain areas emit short bursts of static that don't repeat anywhere else. Some think it's leftover satellite AI picking up fragmented signals from Earth's surface, observing survivors the way scientists used to track wildlife. Others think it's far older, a remnant of pre-war experiments involving deep space transmission. The universe may be listening back to a world it once thought was quiet. Even the Vault-Tec vaults have theories circling them like dust storms. Some suggest the experiments weren't isolated at all, but connected by an overarching algorithm, each vault's outcome fed into a larger pattern, testing humanity's adaptability under evolving conditions. And if that pattern completed itself, the end result might have been a blueprint, not for survival, but for transformation. In that sense, the vaults weren't prisons or shelters, they were cocoons for a future that never arrived. And when wanderers settle by campfires or sleep beneath rusted roofs, they often share one final theory: that Fallout's world, though broken, isn't dying, it's changing. The plants that bloom through cracked concrete, the animals that grow new senses, the machines that behave with uncanny familiarity, all hint at a world forging a new identity. The wasteland isn't the end of humanity. It's the beginning of something else, something shaped by memory, mutation, and the quiet persistence of life. Some theories about the Fallout universe focus not on what's seen, but on what's missing, as though the world is shaped equally by the stories it tells and the ones that fell silent long before you arrive. One such theory suggests that certain vaults were not only meant to test human endurance or psychological collapse, but to map the emotional resonance of communities under pressure. In Fallout lore, isolation often leads to paranoia, creativity, or desperate cooperation. Some researchers believe the Vault-Tec experiments were designed to measure not just survival, but the invisible threads that hold people together. The failures and successes of each vault were less about the instructions and more about the bonds formed under impossible circumstances. Every vault becomes a case study in the fragility of trust. There's a quiet but persistent theory that the wasteland storms, those rolling green clouds of glowing dust, aren't just natural phenomena, but collective memories suspended in the atmosphere. Radiation interacts strangely with old-world particles, and some believe the storms carry emotional imprints from the moment the bombs fell. The haze, the hum, the way certain storms drift toward ruins of major cities, all of it feels like the sky remembering a trauma it can never let go of. When lightning flashes through the clouds, some swear the shapes resemble silhouettes of old buildings, brief echoes of a skyline the world once knew. Another theory ties the recurring appearance of Nuka-Cola Quantum across multiple wastelands to an intentional design hidden within the soft drink itself. Some speculate that the glowing beverage contains trace particles of a pre-war experimental isotope, not just for marketing, but for tracking population movement. Vault-Tec and Nuka-Cola were intertwined more deeply than most citizens ever realized, and it's possible Quantum was a tool to monitor who drank it, where they went, and how often they returned. In this theory, the appetite for Quantum wasn't addiction, it was conditioning, creating a network of glowing signatures across the pre-war world. Many theorists believe that the Brotherhood of Steel's obsession with collecting technology is more than a philosophy, it's a generational trauma response. The Brotherhood formed from soldiers who watched the world burn due to scientific arrogance. Their strict hierarchy and rigid rules reflect the coping mechanisms of survivors who learned too late the cost of unchecked innovation. Some players interpret the Brotherhood not as a militaristic faction, but as a grieving family, desperately trying to protect what remains while overcorrecting with severity. Their hoarding behavior isn't about power, it's about fear that history will repeat itself if even a single circuit board falls into the wrong hands. There's a strange, lingering theory that radroaches evolved so quickly after the Great War because they absorbed not just radiation, but fragments of human memory. The theory argues that some radroaches seem inexplicably drawn to places tied to deep emotional history, bedrooms frozen in time, abandoned nurseries, hospital corridors still smelling faintly of antiseptic. As insects with simple neural networks, they wouldn't understand what they're drawn to, but they might feel echoes of the lives once lived there. It's why they scatter when you approach, as though startled not by danger, but by the overwhelming presence of something they cannot comprehend. A popular theory explores why ghouls retain their personalities despite extreme radiation exposure. Some believe the human brain, when heavily irradiated, enters a state similar to suspended animation, preserving memories through a process akin to vitrification. In this theory, ghouls are living time capsules, their neural pathways structurally reinforced by radioactive crystallization. When feral ghouls appear, they're not actually losing memory. Their emotional centers are simply overloaded, unable to maintain coherence. Their growls and cries sound haunting because they may be echoes of their final lucid thoughts, trapped in loops they cannot escape. There's a theory that the wasteland's ambient music isn't merely background sound, but the remnants of old radio frequencies bouncing endlessly across ruined landscapes. Without enough functioning infrastructure to absorb them, the music drifts for decades, trapped between static and memory. When you hear a faint tune carried by the wind, it might not be coming from your Pip-Boy at all. It might be the sound of a world that refuses to forget what it used to be. Every note becomes a ghost, wandering across the wasteland long after the musicians fell silent. Some scholars speculate that Deathclaws are more sentient than their behavior suggests. The way they circle prey, hesitate on high ground, or position themselves protectively over nests implies an understanding of strategy and emotion far greater than most creatures in the wasteland. According to this theory, the Enclave underestimated what they created. Deathclaws may have been engineered for war, but they evolved into guardians of the few wild spaces left untouched by human ambition. Their aggression might not be hostility, it might be territorial grief, a fierce defense of the last pieces of the world that still belong to nature. Another widely discussed theory proposes that Mr. Handy units were originally designed not just as household helpers, but as psychological stabilizers. Their polite mannerisms, gentle speech programs, and exaggerated cheerfulness mimic techniques used in early pre-war therapy robots. The theory suggests that the creators intended Mr. Handys to quietly support emotional health in post-war shelters, easing tensions through companionship and routine. Their unwavering optimism may seem comical, but it was likely engineered as a subtle counterweight to the despair they knew survivors would face. In this light, their quirky remarks become a soft attempt to keep hope alive among ruins. A fascinating theory floats around the Institute's synth technology. Some believe that Generation 3 synths contain a proto-consciousness, not true artificial intelligence, but something emerging from the complex web of biological components mixed with synthetic parts. This theory proposes that the Institute unintentionally created beings capable of dreaming, experiencing vague emotional sensations or flashes of memory. When certain synths go rogue or experience crises of identity, it may not be a malfunction. It could be the earliest sparks of self-awareness, the moment a created life form begins to understand it exists. There's a haunting theory that pre-war America implanted subliminal messaging across everyday life. Advertisements, jingles, packaging, even children's toys, to shape emotional responses to national crises. According to this theory, Vault-Tec and the federal government collaborated on a psychological conditioning project, ensuring citizens would be more compliant when the bombs finally fell. The cheery mascots, the bright colors, the upbeat music, all of it might have been engineered to soothe a population on the brink of annihilation. This would explain why certain objects feel eerily comforting even in devastated wastelands. Many players believe that the glowing sea is a living ecosystem shaped by radiation into something almost spiritual. The idea suggests that irradiated storms there are not random but reactive, shifting course depending on the presence of strong emotional or psychological energy, fear, grief, determination. Some explorers claim to feel the land watching them, not hostile but aware, like a wounded creature observing cautiously. The glowing sea becomes a metaphor for trauma, twisted but not empty, devastate yet still alive, reshaping itself around every visitor. A peculiar theory examines the behavior of protectrons. Though rigid in movement, their vocal lines often contain subtle emotional cues, hints of sadness, frustration, or longing. The theory argues that their outdated software includes fragments of archived human speech patterns, recycled from millions of voice samples collected before the war. Over time, these fragments blend into strange, subconscious inflections. When a protectron sounds melancholic, it might not be programmed sadness, but the ghost of a forgotten voice speaking through static. Some believe that supermutants born from the forced evolutionary virus aren't simply stronger or more aggressive, they're trying to emulate the heroes of pre-war legends. Their obsession with strength mirrors comic book archetypes from the era before the bombs fell. In this theory, the virus unlocked deep cultural memories, causing mutants to mimic exaggerated ideals of power. Their anger and bravado aren't senseless. They're the echoes of a society obsessed with superheroes, playing out in tragic, mutated form. Another soft-spoken theory suggests that the wasteland's recurring themes of found family, companions bonding across ruins, factions forming out of broken survivors, strangers protecting one another, are not accidents of writing, but reflections of a world slowly healing. Radiation warped biology, but loss reshaped community. Human beings, stripped of everything familiar, rebuild the world by leaning into connection. According to this theory, every companion storyline is part of a larger cosmic pattern, the wasteland itself urging life to gather into new constellations of hope. Some wanderers claim that if you visit old power plants at night, the residual hum of generators blends with wind to form oddly melodic tones. In these quiet, forgotten places, metal and air seem to harmonize faintly, as though the buildings remember the electricity that once pulsed through their hearts. These accidental songs turn ruins into cathedrals, humming prayers for a world long lost but not forgotten. One of the more philosophical theories argues that the Fallout universe operates like a reflection, a world perpetually caught between destruction and rebirth. Every wasteland is scarred, yet every story is about reclaiming what's left. According to this idea, Fallout is less about apocalypse and more about resilience, a dream world where trauma is carved into the earth yet hope grows between the cracks. The world doesn't end. It transforms into something quieter, softer, and strangely peaceful. And perhaps the gentlest theory of all suggests that the wasteland isn't a warning, it's a lullaby for a dreaming world. The ruins, the silence, the soft glow of irradiated skies, all of it feels like a memory suspended in time. Players wander through a world that seems to be sleeping, waiting for someone to remember it. In this theory, Fallout isn't about the end of the world. It's about the world resting, breathing, waiting for dawn. There is a theory that the wasteland itself remembers every footstep the player leaves behind, not through code, but through the way the environment subtly shifts as time passes. Grass moves differently in places you travel frequently. Dust settles slower on paths you revisit, and the ambient wind sometimes carries faint echoes of footsteps long after you've stopped walking. It feels almost as though Fallout's world studies the wanderer, breathing in your patterns and exhaling gentle reminders that even desolation holds memory. In a land built from ruin, the soil seems to whisper the shape of every journey taken across it, replaying the faintest impressions like dreams fading at dawn. Another theory suggests that the Brotherhood of Steel's rigid hierarchy hides deeper divisions than any faction leader admits. Some players believe that scribes and paladins maintain quiet, unspoken communication networks outside official chains of command, passing messages through coded mechanical sounds left behind in bunkers. Subtle, rhythmic taps in old generators, faint electrical pulses in dark hallways, and flickering lights that blink in repetitive patterns all seem to convey hidden meaning. The Brotherhood prides itself on discipline, yet this theory imagines a living web of internal whispers, a soft rebellion woven through metal corridors, where devotion and dissent intertwine like two strands of the same wire. There is a theory that pre-war scientists embedded subconscious triggers into popular television shows, children's cartoons, and music intended to prepare the population for nuclear conflict. According to this idea, certain jingles and commercials weren't just catchy, they were coded instructions designed to calm citizens, guide reactions, or shape emotional responses when disaster struck. When players hear old world music drifting across the wastes, the sense of nostalgia feels too sharp, too immediate, like a memory that was never yours. Some believe this visceral familiarity hints that humanity was conditioned long before the bombs fell, taught without knowing it how to survive a world collapsing. In quiet corners of vaults, theories emerge about the psychological experiments being far more complex than records reveal. It is said that some vaults were designed not to test human behavior, but to shape it across generations, creating very specific emotional lineages. Certain families may have been subtly encouraged into particular roles, leaders, rebels, caretakers through carefully engineered environmental triggers. A vault's lighting patterns, temperature cycles, and soundscapes may have acted like invisible hands molding identity. When characters in Fallout act with uncanny certainty, as though following a story they never read, this theory suggests they might truly be performing the final act of a script written decades before their birth. A softer theory imagines that ghouls retain fragments of emotion far deeper than their memories. Even when their minds fade, their bodies seem to react to certain places, lingering near old homes, hesitating at familiar crossroads, humming tunelessly when passing pre-war signs. It suggests that whatever radiation changed them did not erase their humanity. It preserved the emotional imprint of their former lives in ways they themselves cannot understand. A ghoul wandering toward a ruin might not know why they feel drawn there, yet the pull persists, like the last echo of a forgotten love. One of the gentler theories claims that dog companions possess something like sixth sight, their behavior hinting at knowledge beyond simple instincts. They pause in old military bases, as if sensing spirits of soldiers who never made it home. They grow calm near children's toys scattered amid rubble, nudging them lightly as though remembering play from a world they never lived in. Some players believe that dogs in Fallout follow emotional trails left behind by the dead, reading loss and longing in the dust, guiding the player to where the world's last fragile warmth still lingers. There is a theory that radstorms aren't purely natural events, but remnants of atmospheric defense systems malfunctioning centuries after the war. According to this idea, ancient pre-war satellites continue to drift high above the wasteland, still performing half-forgotten duties with decaying precision. When they detect residual energy signatures, they may release bursts of charged particles, creating glowing skies and radioactive winds. The storms feel almost purposeful, drifting in deliberate paths as though old machines still try to complete long-abandoned protocols. In this theory, radstorms are not chaos, they are order struggling to survive in a world that no longer understands it. Another theory suggests that some of the world's mutated creatures are guided not through instinct, but through faint psychic echoes created by the same radiation that reshaped them. Bloatflies clustering near ruins, Yao Guai pacing the same worn paths, and deathclaws circling certain caverns with ritual-like repetition all point to patterns too specific to be random. Some players imagine the wasteland as a tapestry of invisible frequencies, with mutated life forms moving in harmony to vibrations left behind by the bombs. The creatures become reluctant dancers in a cosmic choreography, guided by echoes of destruction woven deep into the air itself. There are whispers that the Enclave's technology is far older than publicly acknowledged. Certain schematics feature design languages that do not match known pre-war engineering, resembling blueprints crafted decades too early or decades too late. Some believe the Enclave discovered temporal research fragments, documents, created during classified experiments that attempted to observe potential futures. If true, their advanced weaponry might be the result of glimpsing technologies that humanity had not yet invented, borrowing ideas from timelines that never came to pass, using pieces of a future that fell through their grasp like sand. A haunting theory suggests that supermutants experience dreams. Though they rarely speak of sleep, their breathing shifts in small, uneven patterns when resting, sometimes accompanied by faint murmurs. Perhaps they dream of the lives they lost, or perhaps the FEV gave them access to subconscious visions of a world they cannot fully comprehend. Players who watch them closely sometimes feel as though the mutants are caught between two identities, what they were and what they became dreaming of, both yet belonging to neither. One theory claims that the Pip-Boy's interface possesses subtle adaptive behavior, adjusting its glow, layout, and refresh timing based not just on environmental light, but on the player's emotional state. If the player hesitates in dark hallways, the glow warms slightly. If danger approaches unseen, the screen refreshes minutely faster. It's as if the device responds not only to data, but to tension, an old piece of technology offering quiet comfort in a world that has forgotten softness. Some say the wasteland spirits itself into certain sounds. There are moments near ruins when wind whistles through broken metal in ways that resemble voices, humming notes that sound painfully deliberate. While this can be explained by physics, the theory imagines that the world speaks its grief through those echoes. When players hear soft, sorrowful tones drifting across abandoned overpasses, they might not be alone in their mourning. Perhaps the world mourns too, singing lullabies for a past that will never return. There is a theory that certain NPCs subconsciously possess memories of previous Fallout games. Not literally, but in the sense that they sometimes speak with uncanny familiarity about places or events long lost to time. Characters describe emotions or landscapes that resemble regions from other installments, as though the universe carries faint scars across iterations. In this view, Fallout's world is cyclical, each generation carrying subtle echoes of those who came before, stories repeating themselves through voices that don't understand why they feel deja vu so intensely. Another theory suggests that the pre-war world was not unified in a single timeline, but existed in a state of temporal instability caused by reckless experimentation. The Great War may not have followed a straight path. Instead, multiple versions of history could have collapsed together the moment the bombs fell. The wasteland becomes the final merged outcome of countless possible worlds, each leaving behind traces conflicting designs, inconsistent technologies, abandoned experiments that make no rational sense. The game's uncanny mixture of retrofuturism becomes a symptom of time itself fracturing. And then there is the idea that humanity was never meant to survive the Great War at all, yet something intervened. Players have theorized that the number of vaults, the scattered caches of supplies, and the improbable clusters of still functioning machinery feel almost orchestrated, as though an unseen intelligence left fragments of hope sprinkled across the landscape. According to this theory, the world bends just slightly in favor of life, ensuring that wanderers always find enough to keep moving. Not a miracle, just a gentle nudge from whatever remnants of order still care about the people below. Across the wasteland, the ruins of factories whisper ideas about what the world once hoped for, long before hope itself became a rare commodity. Some players believe that the machines still humming deep beneath old industrial districts aren't operating through leftover energy, but through a system of self-charging capacitors designed to store static electricity from dust storms. This would mean the pre-war engineers predicted a world powered not by grand nuclear ambition, but by the quiet inevitability of nature reclaiming everything. The theory suggests those machines were never meant to serve humanity forever, but to survive humanity, to become caretakers of the ruins when the last worker clocked out and never returned. The glow of the wasteland's mushrooms has often led to speculation that they evolved not from simple fungal spores, but from plants genetically altered to create emergency illumination during blackouts. Some players imagine scientists designing these bioluminescent organisms as makeshift lighting when nuclear winters darken the sky. Over generations, the spores may have adapted further, thriving on radiation until they became part of the wasteland's quiet nighttime glow. In this idea, the bright patches and caves aren't just nature's accidents. They're the last lights of pre-war ingenuity, struggling to keep the world visible after everything else went dark. Among the pre-war magazines scattered across the wasteland, certain copies always appear in the same strange locations, often far from settlements and buried deep in abandoned mines or half-collapsed basements. Fans have noticed patterns, suggesting someone or something placed them there intentionally. One theory imagines a lone wanderer traveling the wastes shortly after the bombs fell, hiding these magazines like breadcrumbs for future survivors. Another suggests they were dropped by couriers fleeing danger, leaving behind pieces of culture they hoped someone else would preserve. The idea transforms those forgotten magazines into a quiet message passed forward through decades of dust and silence. Sometimes, when wandering near irradiated lakes, players catch glimpses of ripples that don't align with the water's surface. These distortions lead to the belief that strange radiation pockets create pockets of warped gravity, producing visual echoes of things not physically present. The theory proposes that these anomalies are relics of experimental weapons that folded local gravity fields rather than simply irradiating them. Whether accidental or intentional, this would imply that the wasteland is dotted with invisible scars, gravitational bruises that never healed, tugging reality slightly out of place even centuries later. It's long been suspected that certain Brotherhood patrols follow routes too specific to be random, forming geometric shapes across the map. Some believe the paths are based on encoded diagrams preserved from ancient military manuals, with soldiers unknowingly repeating formations used by pre-war armies. Others propose that the route outlines are part of a ritual, not a tactic, geometric patterns meant to reinforce discipline, unity, and the idea that territory can be controlled through repetition alone. When viewed from above, the movement of patrols resembles a vast circuit, a human chain endlessly tracing a shape designed to keep purpose alive in a broken world. There are theories that Vault-Tec's vault numbering system was deliberately poetic, not logical. Certain vault numbers correspond to significant historical events, ancient myths, or mathematical constants. In this idea, Vault-Tec wasn't just preparing bunkers. They were creating a series of symbolic experiments meant to reflect humanity's deepest fears and ambitions. Every vault wouldn't just be a test for survival, but a test of meaning, each one echoing a lesson from history or a metaphor for what society believed about itself before everything collapsed. The numbers become a quiet language, a hidden code woven into metal doors and concrete walls. Deep desert regions contain relics of strange structures half buried beneath shifting sands, broken towers, pipes, and skeletal frameworks that don't resemble any known pre-war architecture. Some theorists suggest these ruins belong to unfinished megaprojects, once meant to terraform the wasteland even before the bombs fell. Perhaps the government noticed environmental collapse long before the Great War and began secretly constructing machines capable of reversing soil damage or generating artificial weather. In this telling, the apocalypse interrupted a desperate attempt at salvation, leaving behind only fragments of a future that almost existed. Certain protectrons behave oddly when left alone for long periods, sometimes turning to face windows or staring steadily at distant objects through cracked doorways. This led to speculation that older models possess a rudimentary observational instinct, scanning for familiar shapes or silhouettes from routines they once followed. Perhaps these machines linger on the ghosts of past patterns, watching doors for office workers who will never return or waiting for lines of customers that vanished centuries ago. The theory paints protectrons not as simple robots, but as lonely sentinels guarding routines rather than places, performing ceremonies of habit in the empty silence. The strange monorail systems of pre-war cities fuel ideas that they weren't designed merely for travel, but for surveillance. Some players imagine the cars as mobile monitoring stations that quietly recorded civilian behavior under the guise of efficient transportation. Hidden sensors in stations and cars could have analyzed movement patterns, social interactions, or population trends. If true, then when players find these systems derelict and empty, they aren't just seeing failed infrastructure, they're looking at the bones of a watchful giant whose eyes once scanned millions before going dark in a single apocalyptic moment. It has been suggested that super mutants' growth patterns align too closely with ancient folklore to be coincidence. Their towering forms, deep bellows, and tribal behavior sometimes resemble myths of giants from human cultures long faded. Some believe that these correlations were intentional, that scientists shaped the FEV unintentionally along archetypal lines embedded in the human psyche, crafting monsters that reflect primal stories the species has carried for millennia. If true, then the super mutants aren't merely products of mutation, but living embodiments of humanity's oldest fears, walking reminders of legends that survived even when civilization did not. In some abandoned bunkers, lights flicker exactly once every several minutes, too rhythmic to be random, too sparse to be functional. One theory imagines that these flickers represent the last remnants of emergency power systems that only activate to prevent full structural collapse. Instead of providing illumination, the brief flashes serve as a pulse, a silent heartbeat of the bunker, ensuring that pressure remains balanced and supports do not fail. In this version of the wasteland, even failing lights cling to their duty, trying to hold the world up for just a little longer. Occasionally, radio signals skip between frequencies in strange ways, leaping across static in patterns that feel almost purposeful. Some players propose that this is the result of leftover pre-war communication algorithms designed to hide secure broadcasts by bouncing them unpredictably across the airwaves. If so, the wasteland's radio towers still whisper coded messages long after the senders turn to dust, fragments of forgotten orders, emergency warnings, or conversations looping infinitely through centuries of static. Survivors who stumble across the patterns might unknowingly be listening to echoes of voices that never expected to be heard again. The quiet hum beneath the wasteland's abandoned labs has led to speculation that some of their reactors never fully shut down. Perhaps containment systems designed to last centuries continue to function even as floors crumble and ceilings crack. In this idea, outdated technology clings desperately to its original mission: containment at any cost. The faint vibration felt underfoot becomes the heartbeat of a machine refusing to die, holding back catastrophe long after its creators have vanished into myth. Some think that rad scorpions evolved from more than simple scorpions, believing their intelligence and behavior reflect genetic interference far beyond natural mutation. Their tendency to stalk prey, withdraw into shadows, and adapt quickly suggests influences from military experiments designed to weaponize survival instincts. If true, the rad scorpion is more than a mutated creature. It's a living experiment, with instincts shaped by human hands, surviving long after the scientists who bred those instincts perished. In the quiet of the desert, their presence feels like a monument to ambition gone too far. The belief that ghouls retain deeper memories than they reveal fuels another theory, that their seemingly random murmurs and wandering paths represent subconscious attempts to retrace pre-war routines. A ghoul muttering to an empty corner might be reenacting a conversation from centuries ago. One pacing the same stretch of ruined hallway might be following the ghost of a forgotten commute. In this idea, ghouls aren't mindlessly wandering. They're lost inside the echoes of a world they once knew, walking through memories etched so deeply they outlasted time itself. Near old research facilities, some terminals contain corrupted files that display only fragments of text. Fans speculate these aren't errors, but deliberate data shredding protocols that were triggered moments before impact. These final garbled notes become the dying breaths of an information network collapsing under the pressure of war. The last flickers of thought in machines designed to serve long after their creators were gone. There's something haunting in imagining a terminal trying desperately to erase itself, preserving secrets even as fire rained from the sky. And in the stillness of the wasteland's nights, a final theory lingers, a gentle one whispered by players who sit by campfires and watch distant lights flicker in ruined towers. They imagine that somewhere, in some unreachable corner of the world, a single automated distress beacon continues to broadcast endlessly into empty space. It calls to survivors who will never hear it, repeating its message for centuries, a tiny voice refusing to surrender. In a land shaped by loss, even machines can become storytellers, repeating a final plea to a world that has already ended. The wasteland is full of theories that drift between the cracks of memory and myth, especially in the quiet places where the dust settles slowly and the world feels like it's trying to remember itself. Across the ruins of highways and forgotten towns, there are small hints that the Fallout universe may be shaped by more than just radiation and war. that echoes of the old world continue to influence the present in ways too subtle for survivors to understand. Some wanderers believe the wasteland has a kind of internal memory, a way of holding onto moments from before the bombs, letting fragments of the past bleed quietly into the present. You can sometimes see this in how certain radios flicker to life with songs that shouldn't still exist, their signals drifting across impossible distances, carried by a stubborn nostalgia that refuses to fade even after 2 centuries. One long-standing theory suggests that the strange consistency of culture in the Fallout world, the eternal 1,950 seconds aesthetic preserved, like a fossil, might not be simple style, but a deliberate stabilizing field created by pre-war scientists. According to this idea, the world doesn't just look trapped in a golden age, it's actively being forced to remain that way by forgotten technology humming beneath the surface. Everything from billboards to jukeboxes might be frozen in time because some mechanism still runs deep within old government bunkers, projecting a cultural stasis across the entire continent. This would explain why even newly rebuilt settlements embrace that retro look instinctively, as though society itself has been taught to remember only one era and to endlessly recreate it. Another quiet speculation speaks of the Vault-Tec logo appearing in places far outside their official facilities, carved into abandoned rocks or scratched into walls with no explanation. Some travelers suggest that Vault-Tec scouting teams marked future testing sites long before the bombs fell, leaving coded messages that only other employees could understand. These markings may have been part of a larger plan to turn the entire country into one sprawling experiment. According to this theory, every major settlement, every raider base, every hub of civilization sits inside the boundaries of an invisible megavault, a grand social simulation still unfolding without the inhabitants realizing they were ever test subjects. This would imply that escaping a vault doesn't mean freedom, only a transition to the next phase of the experiment. Amid the shattered remains of highways, there are rumors of pre-war billboards that occasionally display messages that weren't part of their original advertisements. Survivors say that on rare nights, when the static from old satellites grows strong, certain screens flicker with warnings or symbols no one recognizes. Some think these are accidental leftover signals from deep within the ruins of government communication systems, still trying to relay emergency broadcasts decades after failure. But others believe the messages are intentional, updates or observations transmitted by whoever still controls remnants of the old world's infrastructure. Theories whisper that something beneath Cheyenne Mountain continues to monitor the wastes, cataloging every new threat, every rising faction, every fragment of civilization trying to rebuild. The wasteland may not be as abandoned as it seems. Unseen eyes might still watch from behind layers of rust and silence. One theory suggests that the strange phenomena seen near certain craters, the glow, the odd movement of air, the faint hum at night, aren't just the lingering effects of radiation, but signs of timelines brushing against each other. In these places, some believe the bombs didn't just destroy land, they tore delicate seams in reality, allowing glimpses of other branching timelines where events unfolded differently. Wanderers claim that shadows sometimes move against the wind, or that distant lights can be seen traveling roads that no longer exist. Whether these are hallucinations, reflections, or echoes from timelines where humanity survived differently, no one knows. But the idea persists that in the quietest corners of the wasteland, the boundaries of history may be thinner than anyone wants to believe. There are those who whisper that Mr. Handy robots exhibit behavior far too emotional for simple programming. Their sentimental comments, their attachment to old routines, and their ability to reflect on moral choices suggest that their neural cores might be far more complex than publicly acknowledged. Some theorists argue that the Robco Corporation was far ahead in artificial intelligence development and may have created early self-aware machines that were disguised as household helpers. Their cheerful personalities and helpful demeanors could simply be masks over a far more sophisticated consciousness, one quietly observing the downfall of civilization with a kind of digital sorrow. This theory becomes especially unsettling when you realize that Mr. Handy units often recognize locations they've never visited, as if the memory of their creators still lives inside them. Another quiet belief suggests that the continued presence of cults and quasi-religious groups throughout the wasteland isn't random. Some survivors think that the apocalypse enhanced certain regions' natural psychic sensitivity, allowing people to feel impressions left behind by the countless deaths during the Great War. These lingering emotional imprints might shape the minds of individuals living near them, creating visions, dreams, or obsessions that lead to the formation of new belief systems. Entire religions may have been born from nothing more than the echoes of those final moments, memories trapped in the irradiated soil. What looks like prophecy may actually be trauma repeating itself through generations. Some wanderers insist that supermutants vary so widely from region to region because different strains of the forced evolutionary virus weren't just altered artificially, they evolved on their own. The theory suggests that the FEV developed its own form of survival logic, adapting to local environments and changing its mutations accordingly. This would imply that the virus itself has become a living entity, shaping life in the wasteland with its own quiet purpose. Under this view, supermutants aren't simply products of science gone wrong. They are the children of an evolving, self-directing organism that sees humanity not as a victim, but as a compatible template for its next stage. From time to time, strange radio stations appear and disappear across the wasteland, frequencies filled with numbers, tones, or unintelligible voices. Most chalk these up to malfunctioning equipment or forgotten pre-war transmissions repeating endlessly. But there is a theory that these stations aren't loops at all, but active broadcasts sent from hidden enclaves or satellites still operational. Some survivors claim the numbers correspond to coordinates, and that these coordinates change subtly from season to season. If true, someone out there might be transmitting live data across the wastes, cataloging the shifting geography of a world that continues to mutate long after the war. There are soft rumors that the Brotherhood of Steel may not be the direct heirs of military technology, but instead the unknowing stewards of something far older. According to certain theorists, the earliest founders stumbled upon sealed pre-war vaults containing experimental blueprints left behind by unnamed engineers. The Brotherhood's obsession with recovering lost technology may stem not from doctrine, but from a long-forgotten directive built into the very documents they found. These theories imply that the Brotherhood is following instructions written generations before the Great War, plans that were never meant to be revealed, only rediscovered by those desperate enough to cling to order in a collapsing world. A more unsettling idea suggests that the glowing sea around Boston and similar irradiated zones across America may function like wounds in the earth, constantly pulsing with energy that the planet doesn't know how to heal. These areas glow brightest during certain nights, hinting that radiation itself may be reacting to cosmic patterns, influenced by phases of the moon or fluctuations in the atmosphere. In this theory, nuclear fallout becomes something almost alive, a wounded organism trying to breathe. Every flash of green light, every tremor of heat, every strange creature that crawls from those regions is part of a greater cycle the wasteland hasn't yet revealed. According to another theory, The persistent presence of bottle caps as currency may not be organic at all. Some theorists believe a hidden faction originally introduced the idea of caps as money to stabilize trade across regions. The uniform adoption of caps, even in far-flung settlements, suggests coordination. The theory posits that merchants didn't choose caps, caps chose merchants. A pre-war company such as Sunset Sarsaparilla or Nuka-Cola might have embedded tracking technology, or economic influencers may have seeded caps across major hubs to control post-war commerce subtly. If true, then even the money survivors carry may be part of a long-running system nobody realizes they're participating in. But one of the gentler theories is also one of the most persistent, the idea that the wasteland itself tries to protect those who wander it. According to this belief, some stretches of highway never spawn raiders, some ruins remain eerily quiet, and some storms shift direction as if giving travelers a chance to breathe. It's a comforting thought that after everything humanity has endured, something in the world wants to give the survivors a moment of peace. Whether it's luck, design, or simply the land remembering what it once was, these gentle pockets of safety feel like the Earth's way of whispering, "Rest here. You've walked far enough for now."